Hello there, and welcome to Murder Most British. I'm Zach.
Hi listeners, I'm Rachel.
Ooh, we've got a pretty crazy mystery on our hands this week.
We do.
Mm.
Very interesting one.
Yeah, Northern Ireland, back in the 50s. I can't wait. But before we begin, a small request from us.
If you enjoy listening to our true crime stories, please give us a like, follow, and a 5-star rating. Also, follow us on Instagram, TikTok at Murder Most British, and on Facebook, MMB Podcast.
You can also join us in the public Crypt Chat, our free Discord channel where you can talk about cases, share theories, and read the latest news from the archive.
Your support helps the archive grow and ensures that no story is ever forgotten.
All right, let's get into this one. Okay, I'm so excited. It's a really good one.
Well, here we go. On a wet November evening in 1952, a young woman stepped off a bus on the northern shore of Belfast Lough and walked the familiar route towards her family home. The lamps along the road shimmered in the rain. The water in the glen carried its usual low, unhurried sound. By all appearances, it was a night like any other. A night that gave no sign of what would soon unfold beyond the quiet of those first footsteps.
The Curran family lived on the wooded fringe of Whiteabbey, north of Belfast, where the suburbs thinned into fields and the mist from Belfast Lough drifted over the roads in low, colourless veils. Their home, Glen House, stood at the end of a long, tree-lined avenue, an imposing residence whose seclusion and scale reflected the family's standing as much as their desire for privacy.
Patricia Curran, born in 1933, grew up in this environment of privilege and quiet scrutiny. Her father, Lancelot Curran, was a respected judge and former Attorney General for Northern Ireland. Her mother, Doris, managed the household with a formality that matched her husband's public role. As one of 4 children, Patricia learned early that careful discipline and polished restraint expected within Northern Ireland's legal elite.
Excellent name, Lancelot. I love it.
Very old-fashioned.
Yeah, it was very, like Knights of the Round Table, old. She attended Rockport School in Craigaved, where teachers remembered her as conscientious and reserved, with a particular aptitude for English. Later, at the Belfast Royal Academy, she entered a larger, more demanding academic world, but carried the same reputation: polite, diligent, and observant. A young woman who moved quietly through the corridors without drawing unnecessary attention.
Well, life at Glen House followed a controlled rhythm. Domestic staff moved through its high rooms and long hallways with practiced discretion, maintaining the order that underpinned the judge's public image. Evenings often involved around his work, and Patricia's free time filled with school books, church involvement, and modest outings with close friends.
The landscape around the house shaped the texture of her days. The narrow road leading toward Jordanstown, the winter dark woods that pressed close to the property, and brief glimpses of the Lough through bare branches. Locals described the area as peaceful, though in the colder months, its quiet could feel unusually deep.
Well, the Currans belonged to the conservative social world of the Loughshire communities, professional, Protestant families who valued respectability, discretion, and church-going habits. Patricia moved within this pattern without any recorded resistance. She attended church services with her family, participating in the ordered rituals of their social class and community.
Seems like a pretty solid woman. Yeah. And family, respected.
Yeah.
At home, she shared space with her brother Desmond, who, in later life, would convert to Catholicism, enter the Jesuit order, and spend decades as a missionary priest in South Africa. The household in those years was shaped by Doris Curran's strict supervision and by Judge Curran's long hours in his study or chambers, giving Glen House an atmosphere of formality and quiet discipline that framed all of the family's daily routines.
Accounts and later recollections suggest that in her final school year, Patricia balanced increasing academic commitments with the familiar routines of Glen House. Many described her revising in quieter rooms of the house, taking short walks along the estate's approach road, and limiting her social life to modest, supervised outings.
So by late 1952, nothing in these routines suggested disruption. School, homework, family meals, brief walks, and the unspoken expectations that came with being a judge's daughter. They simply formed the quiet, ordered world she moved through in the months before Glen House would draw an attention it had never known before.
It sounds like they had quite a slow, kind of relaxed, routine life in,
just
nothing,
a normal family, Obviously sort of an upper class, you've got the father who's a judge and all that, and that does bring some prestige. But it just seems like a normal, everyday family.
Yeah. Well, on Wednesday, the 12th of November, 1952, Belfast slid early into darkness. A thin, wet November light hung over the city as students emptied from lecture halls at the Queen's University, hurrying past the shining pavements and bus queues forming under the drizzle. Among them was Patricia Curran, slight, studious, and following a routine that had never before hinted at danger.
Well, she spent the afternoon with a fellow student, John Steele, taking tea in the city center. It was the sort of outing that neither would remember for anything other than its ordinariness. When the two parted, Steele walked with her through the damp streets of Smithfield bus station, where the Belfast Whiteabbey service idled in the wash of yellow interior light. At around 5 p.m., he watched her board. Later, in statements and in court, he would repeat that time without hesitation. 5 o'clock. The Whiteabbey bus. Patricia stepping into the glow of its door.
Well, the bus followed its familiar path out of Belfast, tracing the industrial edges of the low shore. Approximately 5:20 p.m, passengers saw her rise and alight at Whiteabbey, rain still feathering the windows as she stepped down to the roadside. She turned towards the lane leading to Glen House, walking into a village evening that had begun like any other.
An 11-year-old newspaper boy, George Chambers, was also out in the cold that hour, delivering papers along his usual route. He saw Patricia heading toward the gateway of the Curran property, the entrance to the Glen, a long, tree-shrouded drive leading up to her family home. A few moments later, as he himself walked up the drive, he heard movement in the bushes, a faint rustling, the kind of noise that might pass for birds disturbed in the leaves. Then, farther off, the factory horn sounded at 5:45 p.m., marking a fixed point in the evening, like the toll of a bell.
On the return down the same drive, Chambers heard a second sound. This time it was heavier. What he described as a foot or something like it, pressing down through wet leaves. The noise frightened him enough that he broke into a run, fleeing back toward the open road, and he never saw Patricia again.
At Glen House, the hours gathered with an unnatural slowness. The house stood lit against the dark, the long rooms holding the quiet tension of a family waiting for footsteps that never came. Patricia's routine was steady enough for her absence soon felt wrong. Concern became unease. Unease hardened into alarm.
Around 1:35 or 1:40 a.m, Judge Lancelot Curran telephoned family friends, the Davisons, asking them to come at once. At approximately 1:45 a.m, he contacted the local RUC barracks to report that his daughter had not returned from the 5 p.m. bus. The Glen, normally a private, silent stretch of wooded ground, became the place the search turned next.
Shortly after 2 a.m., Constable Rutherford arrived at the gate and began walking up the drive. Ahead of him, he saw the judge, a lone figure in the wet dark. Before he could reach him, a shout carried from within the trees, urgent, cutting across the rustle of branches. The two men ran toward the sound, following the sweep of a torch through the dense shrubbery. There, among the wet undergrowth, they found her.
Oh.
Yeah.
Just
you're like, oh, well, she must be out with some friends. And then it comes to a certain time at night and you're just like, okay, we've not heard anything. Nothing.
Especially when it's out of the norm, out of the ordinary of someone's routine.
Yeah.
You definitely, it's like, any parent, if their child's sort of, not home at the same time, it's just automatic panic.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on? Something's not quite right. They should have been here. They were always here. But, here we go. Let's delve a bit more further into this story. Patricia lay on her back at the foot of a tree, her clothing soaked through, her body about 40 feet from the drive and roughly 260 yards from the main road. Her brother Desmond was leaning or kneeling over her, the torch casting sharp, trembling edges of light across her stillness. The narrow clearing held the small geometry of disaster. A strip of cold earth, dark foliage pressed close, and a young woman unmoving beneath the trees.
Moments later, the Davisons arrived, summoned earlier by the judge's call. Hope, misplaced, but powerful, briefly animated those present. Someone thought she might be breathing. In that instant, preservation of evidence meant nothing. They lifted her carefully from the ground and carried her to the waiting car, desperate to believe that help might still be possible. Yeah, I could understand that 100%.
Especially if
there's
you
any
kind of
hope.
like automatically think, oh my God, she's still breathing. Like, let's get help.
Yeah, you're just like, let's go. Yeah.
Well, the path from the Glen to Whiteabbey cut through the rain-darkened landscape as the vehicle sped towards the home of Dr. Kenneth Wilson, the Curran family doctor. At about 2:20 a.m., Patricia was carried into his surgery. Under the clear electric light, the night's fragile uncertainty collapsed. Her jumper was saturated in blood, punctured by small holes that first suggested a shotgun blast. A misapprehension that would later be corrected. What mattered was that what could no longer be denied. She was cold to the touch, fixed in rigor mortis. Wilson estimated she had been dead for at least 4 hours, possibly as long as 12.
Outside Dr. Wilson's surgery, the November night pressed on, cold and heavy, but the geography of the crime had already begun to shift. Patricia's body, once a pale shape in the shrubbery beside the Glen Drive, now lay under electric light, awaiting formal custody. The Glen itself, emptied of people, kept only the marks left behind, impressions in the leaf mold, splintered stems, the faint tracks of hurried feet retreating through the wet soil. What had been an invisible place hours earlier was now a scene waiting to be examined.
It was nearly dawn when the next figure stepped into the story. About 5 a.m. on 13th of November, Dr. A. L. Wells, registrar in pathology at the Royal Victoria Hospital, arrived at the surgery and formally took charge of the body. Patricia was still fully clothed except for what had gone missing somewhere between the road and the clearing: her right glove, her hat, her scarf, and her shoes. Her coat hung open. One of its bottom buttons was missing, later recovered with a scrap of torn lining attached. A cardigan button was gone as well. These were not dramatic discoveries, merely quiet facts that would sit heavily in the record.
By the time Wells examined her, rigor mortis had set thoroughly, fixing the musculature into its stiff finality. Based on this, he estimated that she had died roughly 12 hours before, early evening on the 12th of November, placing the fatal attack within the tight window marked by the bus, the walk toward the Glen, and the paperboy's fleeing impressions of noise in the leaves.
Well, later that afternoon, at around 3 p.m, Wells conducted the full post-mortem. Under the clinical brightness of the hospital lights, the violence carried out in the dark became a series of numbered wounds. 37 stab injuries in total. 21 on the front of the chest, 8 so deep and forceful that any one might have been the fatal blow. One blow had fractured a rib. 2 separate injuries marked the face, both consistent with blunt force impact, fist or boot, Wells concluded. There were abrasions and bruisings around the neck. The cause of death was formally recorded as multiple stab wounds inflicted by a sharp implement.
While the pathologist worked, the Glen was being transformed in parallel. What began as a frantic, torchlit rescue attempt now required slow, methodical recording. In daylight, officers traced distances, marked locations, and translated the previous night's confusion into measurements. They established that the place where Patricia lay was about 260 yards from the public road, along the private drive that served Glen House. From the edge of that drive into the trees, roughly 40 feet. The vegetation between showed signs of disturbance. Later, the official report would phrase it plainly: the body appeared to have been dragged from the driveway through the shrubbery to his final position.
Not far from our home.
Nope.
Oh, gosh.
She was right there.
Yeah.
And they were all in the house while she was out there, unfortunately, getting murdered.
That's sad, isn't it? When she's almost home, safe and sound, and it's just...
You think you're safe on your drive.
Yeah.
She's just walking up the drive, and there you go.
Terrible. Well, her belongings were found, not scattered, but placed. Near the margin of the drive lay her handbag, her woolen hat, and a portfolio containing books and papers from her day at Queen's. They were dry, neatly gathered in a small cluster. In the morning quiet, the arrangement felt like an unspoken detail, a carefulness that sat uneasily beside the brutality inflicted only yards away.
As officers gathered witness statements and compiled their initial notes, the timeline narrowed further into something rigid and spare. Patricia leaving Belfast on the 5 p.m. bus, stepping off at Whiteabbey around 5:20 p.m., and walking toward the Glen. The factory horn at 5:45 p.m., a fleeting sound in the bushes. After that, nothing but darkness until the family began searching.
By the time the sun rose over Whiteabbey on the 13th of November, the Glen had become something else entirely. Not a private avenue to a judge's home, but a mapped, measured locus of violent death. The long drive, once merely the quiet threshold to Glen House, was now fixed in the machinery of investigation. The cramped pocket of trees that had concealed Patricia's body was noted on sketches, its measurements preserved by police notebooks, in its damp earth already disturbed beyond its natural winter stillness.
The world outside continued as any November morning would, but the Glen had already settled into its new shape, the lonely geometry of a murder scene. And from that geometry, one question emerged with a clarity no dawn could dispel. Who had walked that drive with Patricia Curran, and why had she never walked out again?
What do you reckon? You think it's something to do with that guy?
Yeah. Well,
It's a bit
he
funny
said,
that
hey, I
he's-
watched her get on the bus. I saw her get on, and then I don't think anybody saw him on the bus with her, and she got off alone. So someone had to meet her there. And it could have been someone familiar, maybe.
Yeah, it could have been a planned meet.
True.
Or just someone hiding in the trees waiting for her to get home. Obviously, people would have known her routine, so
Yeah,
they could have thought, right, well, she gets home at about this time.
very true. I mean, you could make it out to where someone was stalking her.
Yeah,
And they were like, oh, I know her routine, and I'm just going to go and murder her,
yeah. But the motive, I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like that.
Just random act of violence.
Yeah.
That would seem more like it was like a stalking
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Well, let's delve further in and to find out more. Dawn did not bring clarity to Whiteabbey on 13th of November 1952. It brought only a different kind of cold. The bureaucratic chill of an investigation beginning under the long shadows of Glen House. Before the grass had fully dried from the night's rain, the RUC and the Royal Air Force Special Investigation Branch had begun their parallel descents into the case, each trying to chart meaning in a crime that appeared, at first glance, almost medieval in its ferocity.
The police moved through the physical scene, then outward into homes, barracks, and routine, asking for movements, times, and faces. The violence described by Dr. Wells in Belfast, 37 stab wounds, bruising, blunt force injuries, had already fixed the murder as a matter of extraordinary brutality. Now came the search for a human shape to cast behind it. Officers moved with the grave deliberation of men aware they stood on the grounds of a senior judge, a place where the usual boundaries of fear, propriety, and influence press close to on every step.
By the afternoon of the 13th, the investigation stretched beyond the Glen, up the road to Edinmore, the RAF residence less than a half a mile from the Curran estate. There, airmen were assembled for questioning, orderly rows of uniforms in dining rooms and offices, each man asked to account precisely for the hour between 5 and 6 p.m. on the previous night. It was a narrowing of the timeline that placed the killing near the sounding of the factory horn at 5:45, anchoring everything to a moment when dusk had collapsed fully into darkness.
Among the names taken down in those interviews, one began to recur: leading aircraftman Ian Hay Gordon. He had told Sergeant Letham that at 4:30 he was in Whiteabbey post office. By 5 p.m. he said he was back in Edinmore in the dining hall. After his tea, he claimed he walked with Corporal Connor to the billet, stayed there, and later went to the NAAFI.
We call it the NAFI over here. It's the NAFI.
Oh my gosh. Thank goodness. Well, later he went to the NAFI for another cup of tea. It was the kind of account that sounded plausible enough until other men began to speak.
Some remembered no such sighting. Others recalled conversations that, in the retelling, cast Gordon in an uneasy light. A request here, a suggestion there, that someone might stand up for him, might say that they had seen him on the night of the murder. Small details, but they pricked the orderly surface of military routine like the faintest pulse of unease.
Even before suspicion cohered, chance placed Gordon at 2 points along the geography of the crime. Mrs. Mary Jackson recognized him in the Edenmore Gate around 5:10 p.m., walking toward the road. And at roughly 6 p.m., Mrs. Hetty Little saw a thin, pale man in a light raincoat step out of the Glen Gate and pass her on the road. Her later identification of Gordon was hesitant, almost spectral. Quote, "One chap looks like him." Yet it was enough to bind his presence, if not his guilt, to the edge of the Curran estate.
As November darkened into December, the police spoke with Gordon again and again. He repeated his story, tea at 5 p.m, time in the billet, a return to the NAFI.
NAFI.
I used to work in, on the barracks at Bassingbourne. It was pretty cool. I used to go to the NAFI. They'd tell us off. We weren't allowed in there. It was only for the recruits and the military personnel.
Well, you are
not us civvies.
You are a rebel, so I get it.
Well, they had like games. It was like fruit machines and everything in there. It was cool, like pool tables. It was really good.
Should have joined up. Could have gone all there all the time.
They did actually want me to, because I used to spend a lot of time at the guard room. And they was like, "Oh, you should apply for a job on the MOD." I was like, "Yeah, no thanks." Anyway, the account did not shift, except in one crucial place. He admitted lying about being with Corporal Connor. Why he had lied, he said, was Connor's doing. Connor, under oath, said otherwise. The contradiction hung in the air like breath on winter glass, opaque, troubling, unresolved.
Then came January. 3 days of interviews, long hours behind closed doors, questions circling and tightening. On the 15th of January, 1953, after what the officers described as a voluntary decision to, quote, tell the truth, Gordon gave a written confession. The violence, the encounter, the stabbing, it spilled out in a narrative of blackout and confusion.
The confession, once placed before the RUC, did not end the investigation so much as transform it. What had begun as a wide search, shadowed by the status of the Curran family and the brutality of the crime, narrowed to a single document. Yet behind its neat handwriting, the investigation entered a darker, more ambiguous terrain, where method gave way to pressure and the pursuit of the killer bled into the shaping of a narrative.
In the days that followed the 15th of January, the police prepared the case that would carry Ian Hay Gordon to trial. His earlier statements, those given in November and December, were now viewed as the evasion of a man concealing guilt. The contradiction over Corporal Connor became an early fracture line, a weakness investigators read as duplicity. But the confession eclipsed everything else. It was long, detailed, and lurid in its description of the attack. In the Gothic vocabulary of the Glen, it supplied what the darkness had withheld. Yet beneath the surface of that document lay a question the investigation did not meaningfully explore: how it had been produced.
Well, Detective Superintendent Capstick and County Inspector Kennedy maintained that Gordon dictated the confession freely, that there had been no coercion, no shaping, no leading questions. But even before the case reached court, hints of discomfort threaded through the record. Gordon had been interviewed repeatedly over the span of 3 days. He had not been offered legal advice, no solicitor was present, though told he could have an RAF officer with him, he was not told that one had been specifically asked to attend. And in the case of the interrogation, questions had turned towards his sexual life. Suggestions of homosexual tendencies, suggestions that in 1953 would have carried enormous social peril.
Oh my goodness. I feel like, because when I was reading this, old boy got Brendan Dassied. The kid got railroaded like a motherfucker. I tell you right now, because you see them because it was making a murderer. Yeah. And the kid, and they were like, if you just tell us, after hours and hours and hours just of grueling questioning, if you just tell us, man, you can go home. And this kid is not, not to disparage him in any way. He's not the brightest, and so it comes down to, he just thought, oh, well, if I make up a story and just tell him, hey, this is what happened, then I can go home and play Sega and have a good time.
It's that naivety, isn't it? That, and then obviously mixed with tiredness. I mean, I know what it's like to feel tired and I don't function right. Yeah. So, I wouldn't make sort of sane decisions, to be fair.
Yeah. It's just crazy how they can, and then they're like, what? Are you homosexual? You outrun, and then you've got that implication in there too. And that's just ridiculous. Disgusting.
Yeah. Dear me.
Well, whether such questioning was coercive, Capstick denied it. But the effect on the 19-year-old, already isolated within the machinery of 2 investigative branches, was left for the court to reconstruct decades later. For the RUC at the time, the investigation moved with renewed certainty. Witnesses were revisited, clothing was seized and examined, tiny bloodstains were located on the inner pocket of Gordon's trousers. Human blood, the analysis said, and a faint stain on the left leg that appeared to have been washed, a spot of blood on a tie, a trace on a glove. None of it was abundant, none of it placed him in the Glen, but gathered together and surrounded by the atmosphere of the confession, it took on a darker significance.
Well, meanwhile, voices from the RAF camp added texture to the picture the investigators believed they were assembling. Aircraftman after aircraftman recounted moments in which Gordon had asked them to confirm seeing him on the evening of the 12th of November. One had said that he felt the matter was too serious to lie about. Another recalled Gordon insisting that a very good friend would be prepared to lie for a man in serious trouble. These were not proofs, but they became part of the investigative mood, a widening ring of suspicion around a young airman who seemed suddenly adrift from his own alibi. You were an airman, weren't you?
Yep, sure
when
was.
When I first met you.
Yeah, sure was. Yeah. Served over 10 years, baby.
Then you got promoted.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But I think he was trying to go around, I think they kind of misconstrued it a bit. I think, in my opinion, that he was going around saying, yeah, you saw me there, did you?
Yeah.
He saw, and then they were like, they've got him in there. He's guilty.
Yeah.
Why would I wasn't going to lie for him.
Yeah.
Possibly that could have been what went down. But by the early 1953, the Glen had receded as a physical scene. Its wet leaves, its rustling underbrush, its narrow driveway lined with trees had been replaced by interview rooms, typed summaries, and the tightening grip of a case that was moving toward indictment. The police, convinced they had solved a murder most foul, prepared their file for the spring court. The RAF SIB, having completed its parallel inquiry, folded its findings into the same current.
And so the investigation ended where the trial would begin, with a confession that would dominate every interpretation of evidence, every recollection, every silence. In 1953, it would be treated as the final word. What the investigation had not resolved, voluntariness, suggestion, pressure, was left to sleep beneath the official record. It was the locked room beneath the stairs, present, unopened, and essential to everything that would follow.
The County Antrim Spring Court opened in March 1953 beneath a pall thicker than the courthouse stone. The case gallery knew what it really was, the trial of a Scottish airman for the murder of a judge's daughter, slain in the dark throat of the Glen of Whiteabbey. At the centre of it all sat Lord McDermott, Lord Chief Justice of Northern Ireland, a towering figure in the law, presiding over a drama that would bind together status, scandal, and the limits of criminal justice for half a century.
Well, in the dock, slight and pale, in borrowed civvies, was leading aircraftman Ian Hay Gordon of the Royal Air Force. 19-year-old Patricia Doris Curran was not only a victim, she was also the daughter of a respected judge, Lancelot Curran. The prosecution needed no theatrics to make its point. The mere recital of the family name, the Glen House address, the number of stab wounds, 37 in all, and the post-mortem estimate of time of death was enough to chill the courtroom.
Yeah. I mean, when you have that much pressure on you as a prosecutor, you're just like, oh shit, I've got to nail this.
Yeah.
If you mess that up, so it's like they didn't think about any other alternatives. They didn't think about any of the coercion or the crazy interviews, and like he didn't have a fucking lawyer with him. They're just like, nope. The cop said this is it. This is the guy. We've got to nail him.
Yeah, it's like tunnel vision on this one suspect.
Yep. Well, the Crown's case, presented with grim assurance, had a single black sun at its center, the confession taken in January. Around it, like orbiting planets, were fragments of corroboration. Mrs. Mary Jackson placed Gordon near Edenmore around the crucial hour. Mrs. Hetty Little described the thin, pale man in a light coat emerging from the Glen Gate. RAF colleagues spoke of his attempts to recruit them into the false alibi, urging them to stand up and say you saw me on the night Patricia was killed. Forensic evidence added a macabre chemical gloss, human blood in his trouser pocket, a suspicious stain on the leg that looked washed, a spot of blood on his tie, a smear on the thumb of his glove.
Yet all of that, weighty though it seemed, was scaffolding. The real edifice was the written statement in which Gordon appeared to place himself beside Patricia in the darkness, escort her up the drive, kiss her, grope her, panic at the threat of exposure to her father, and in a blackout of confusion stabbed her with his service knife. Without that document, the Crown Court case would have been frail. With it, they projected irresistible strength.
The defense knew this and did the only thing the law permitted. They attacked the confession at its root. In a trial within a trial, a voir dire, the jury was excluded while counsel probed the circumstances in which the statement had been obtained. It was here that Detective Superintendent Capstig found himself under sustained cross-examination about long hours of questioning, about suggestions of homosexual proclivities, about the psychological pressure brought to bear on the young RAF engineer far from home and without legal advice. There you go. Pressured him,
Well, I
slandered
definitely
him.
think everybody should have legal advice, you
Yep.
know. Obviously.
That's why we watch crime shows and you see them in the box.
Oh, you're
and they're
always,
just like,
get a lawyer. Where's your lawyer?
I'm like, shut up.
Yep.
I would like to have a lawyer, please.
Yeah.
Shut the fuck up. The cops are not there to help you. They're there to build a case against you.
Yep.
And everything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law,
I
baby.
don't think many people
Shut the
actually
fuck up.
take that seriously, you know. They listen to that.
Yeah.
Because,
when they say, you have a right to remain silent. Yes, you do. Now shut the fuck up.
It's not in anyone's best interest, whether you're guilty or not. At the end of the day, you should still have someone representing you. From
because they know the law and they can protect you.
Yeah,
because they can be in the room with you and they can be like, you can't say that, or no, just shut up, or
they
what,
know the rules on how the police are supposed to behave.
Yes,
in interviews, so it definitely protects not just telling them to be quiet, advising their clients to be quiet, but they can keep an eye on the direction and what is said by the police officers in the interviews and stuff, and make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So
if you take anything from this, you get arrested, shut the fuck up.
Always get a lawyer. Anyway, the allegation was simple and grave, that Gordon's will had been overborne by fear and inducement, that the confession was not the free act of a guilty man, but the product of oppression. Capstick denied the core of it. He told the judge that the statement had been taken properly, that Gordon had dictated it, that no improper threats about his sexual life being exposed to his family had been used as leverage. County Inspector Kennedy supported him on the crucial points. There had been no solicitor present. An RAF officer had not, in the end, sat in on the key interview. But the Crown said this was not improper by the standards of 1953.
When the argument closed, all eyes turned to Lord McDermott. His ruling would determine the whole architecture of the trial. After rehearsing the evidence, he held that the confession was voluntary and fair to admit. He rejected the suggestion that sexual questioning had been used as a coercive weapon. He saw no unfairness in the absence of an RAF officer. In measured tones, he announced that the statement was admissible, along with Gordon's other verbal and written remarks, subject only to minor exceptions. The door to the jury was opened. The confession was carried in.
From that moment, the shape of the defence altered. The ground of denial, I did not kill Patricia Curran, was in effect abandoned. Faced with their client's own words, now sanctified by the judge's ruling, Gordon's team retreated to the only fortified position left to them in 1953. Insanity.
They called a consultant psychiatrist, Dr. Rossiter Lewis. His evidence, delivered in a clinical language yet heavy with consequence, was that Gordon suffered from schizophrenia and hypoglycemia, a disease of the mind paired with the bodily disorder that, he suggested, impaired his reason at the material time. To explore Gordon's memory, Dr. Lewis had used thiopentone, the so-called truth drug, beloved of mid-century psychiatry. Under its influence, he said Gordon's recollection of the events in the Glen resurfaced and appeared to match, in broad outline, the account he had already given to the police. Yeah, what a bunch of shit. That's a crock of shit there.
How is this truth drug, is it?
He got that confession beat into his brain. Mm. You did this, you stabbed her, and so it's already in his brain, and you give him drugs and say, what happened? Oh, it must have what happened.
Say the same thing, isn't he?
The same shit that the cops were drilling into his brain.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Here the Gothic element in this legal drama becomes almost too neat. A truth drug is deployed to excavate the mind of a man whose freedom depends on what he can and cannot remember about a killing in the dark. But as so often in such tales, the instrument that is meant to save him comes close to sealing his fate. For in treating Gordon as the killer whose mental state must be explained, The defence effectively confirmed the Crown's central proposition that Gordon had, in fact, killed Patricia.
The Crown, for its part, called its own medical witness to counter the claim of insanity. The jury thus found themselves not only arbiters of fact, but reluctant evaluators of contested psychiatric diagnoses, asked to weigh one white-coated authority against another, against a backdrop of intense public scrutiny, the judicial gravitas, and the silent presence of the victim's family.
By the final day, the long hours had taken their toll. Lord MacDermot began his summing up in the early evening, guiding the jury through the evidence, and crucially, through the special route opened to them under the Trial of Lunatics Act of 1883. They could acquit, they could convict outright, or, if they were sure that Gordon had committed the actus reus of murder, but satisfied that he was insane at the time, they could return the hybrid form of words, guilty of the act charged but insane when he did it.
Shortly before 9 o'clock, the jurors withdrew. 2 hours later, close to 11 at night, they filed back into the courtroom, faces unreadable in the artificial light. The clerk asked for the verdict. On behalf of the 12, the foreman uttered the phrase that would define Gordon's life for decades. Guilty, but insane.
There was no dramatic pronouncement of years or a tariff. No number was attached to his punishment. Instead, Lord MacDermot pronounced the old formula that Gordon be kept in strict custody until Her Majesty's pleasure be known. With those few words, a young airman was consigned not to a prison term measurable in human units, but to an indeterminate confinement in a hospital for the mentally disordered. No right of appeal lay against such a special verdict. The law in 1953 had spoken its final word.
The doors of the court closed behind him. Outside, the glen at Whiteabbey lay as it always had, a long, tree-tunneled drive, the place where the light of the street lamps did not quite reach, now burdened not only with the memory of a girl's body among the shrubs, but the weight of a legal certainty that would, in time, begin to crack.
Well, in the aftermath of the 1953 verdict, Ian Hay Gordon was removed from the courtroom under the order made against him. Detention at Her Majesty's pleasure. He was committed to Holywell Hospital in County Antrim, part of the psychiatric system then used for those found guilty but insane. He remained there for 7 years. Medical staff soon concluded that he was not mentally ill and received no treatment during his detention. But the order was indeterminate, and no appeal lay against it. The only official trace of the end of this period is the 1960 documentation authorising his release, which was signed off by the responsible minister.
Oh, wow, he wasn't insane. What
Well, apparently not.
Oh, dearie me. Are you kidding?
I think that's the thing. I think, obviously they're just basing it on, a few meetings with this person.
Yeah.
Whereas if they're actually in a mental hospital institute, they're actually being monitored for more than just, say, an hour meeting, sort of 3-4 times a week.
Yeah.
They're 24/7 keeping an eye on their behaviours and can clearly make out whether they're mentally insane or not.
And they were like, we never treated him for anything because he wasn't insane. Well, okay. See you later, buddy.
To me.
That's crazy.
And obviously he couldn't appeal. So there was no way of getting out. He just had to be there, whether the doctors in that hospital thought that he was fine and not insane.
And that's probably why, after only 7 years,
they
were like, what do we do with this guy? He's not insane. We're not treating him. He's just here.
Imagine being
just
insane.
let him go.
Imagine being not insane in an insane asylum.
Yeah. You're surrounded by people who are actually mentally ill and you're just there.
I would actually be scared, to be fair. Just from some of the people that are, seriously schizophrenic, some of their behaviours, and I would be terrified.
100%. I'm like, oh, goodness, what is going on? And you hear all the strange noises and people, getting agitated and that. Oh, goodness. Yeah. But upon his release in 1960, Gordon was instructed to go home to Scotland. Arrangements, they're like, see you later, buddy.
Just go home.
Yeah. Arrangements had been made for him to live under the name John Gordon, giving him anonymity after years of being in an institution. A flat and a warehouse job were provided in Glasgow, where he settled into an entirely quiet life. Few people knew who he was and the case in which he had been entangled with, and he was expressly told not to discuss what happened to him. For decades, he lived unobtrusively, his name absent from any official reference to the Curran murder.
But the long path back to the courts began in 1998, when Gordon applied to the newly established Criminal Cases Review Commission, CCRC for short, seeking to challenge the special verdict that had defined his life. The commission faced an initial legal obstacle. Under the law as it stood, it was not clear that a special verdict returned under the Trial of Lunatics Act of 1883 could be referred back to the Court of Appeal. Parliament corrected this via the Criminal Cases Review Insanity Act of 1999, after which, on the 25th of July 2000, the CCRC formally referred Gordon's case to the Northern Ireland Court of Appeal, its first reconsideration since the trial itself.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy that he had to wait that long to be able to appeal, just to say, I want this reviewed, because of the law said you can't appeal it.
I get that, but then he was still found guilty of murder, just the fact of being insane.
Yeah.
So, I mean, taking it back to and appealing it, he's not technically, you're going to make things worse for yourself, because now you're going to be investigated and you're going to be sentenced, most likely, to murder, knowingly murdering, not insanely murdering. So, yeah,
but
it's a bit weird.
But if you know you're not guilty and you go to the court again and be like, listen,
but what
I'm
if
not,
he is?
Well,
we'll find out.
Well, on the 20th of December 2000, the Court of Appeal quashed the 1953 verdict. It ruled that Gordon's confession should never have been admitted, finding that oppressive questioning, the absence of safeguards during the interview, like a lawyer, and his vulnerability as a suspect meant that the statement could not be regarded as voluntary in law. The court judged the case by modern standards of fairness and found the original proceedings fundamentally unsafe. It did not revisit the facts of Patricia Curran's death. The ruling addressed the fairness of the process, not the identity of the killer.
Right, okay. Wow.
Yeah, they said, it's pretty much, you should have thrown out that confession.
Yeah.
The judge was wrong. I think he was pressured.
And then based on, obviously, the other evidence.
Yeah, but it was because of the dad.
Yeah.
It was a big judge there, and you've got all this pressure on you to convict this guy. Like you said earlier, tunnel vision.
Yeah.
They're just like, this Ian, hey, Gordon guy, we've got him. This is it. And did everything.
I think there was a lot of that back in those days.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of, just, this guy's, very, very likely to have done it because they were in the vicinity. I mean, there could have been like 5 guys that were in the same vicinity within a specific time.
Yeah.
But they home in on, one, or used to home in pretty much on
they
one
find
person,
one or two circumstantial pieces of evidence that might be attributed to this one person, and they're like, yep, this must be the guy, and then they get tunnel vision.
They definitely need to follow all leads in all cases.
Yep.
So, following the judgment, Gordon was formally cleared. As with other quashed convictions, he became eligible under the statutory scheme for consideration of compensation for miscarriage of justice. Living under his post-release identity, he responded only briefly through intermediaries, expressing relief that his name had finally been cleared.
In the years, the Curran case has remained a touchstone in legal, academic, and cultural discussions of wrongful conviction in Northern Ireland. It is frequently cited in studies of confession evidence, interrogation practice, and the pressures layered upon institutions in mid-century policing. The physical setting was inevitably changed, but the landscape retains its eerie resonance. A private avenue, place once sealed in silence, now remembered for the legal reckoning that followed nearly half a century later.
Well, the long avenue to Glen House still runs between its old trees, a strip of ground unchanged in its contours, bearing the weight of a story that travelled from darkness through a courtroom into exile, and finally, after half of a lifetime, back into the light of official truth.
Well, that was the story of the murder of Patricia Curran and the miscarriage of justice against Ian Hay Gordon.
So, well, I wonder whether...
They still haven't caught the guy.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say, that if he's been found, not necessarily not guilty, but, he obviously didn't have another trial.
Nope. They wouldn't have enough evidence. Without that confession...
But this is what I'm saying, he still could have been the murderer, but just the evidence that was gathered was not sufficient enough.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So even though he's not been, but he's been found not guilty mainly because of the way that the
version,
and the not so legitimate confession, but then it doesn't mean that he's not guilty. Do you know what I mean? He could have done it.
True.
Just no evidence, no actual evidence. But I wonder whether it was him or not. Still a mystery.
Well, dear listeners, give us a comment and tell us what you think. Do you think that Ian Hay Gordon was the guy and they've just screwed up with the interrogation and all that and later on was able to overturn it? Or was it someone else?
Could it have been somebody else entirely? One day, hopefully, this mystery will be solved.
Who knows? But I would say something with that. They thought they had their man.
Yeah.
And they never did anything else. No investigation into anyone else.
People, so
nothing.
No other suspects on the list by the sounds of it.
And then almost 50 years later, you gonna find them now?
No, I think evidence all gone and,
Yep.
washed away, so to speak, by the Mother Nature.
The sea of time.
You never know. Never know. But, Ian Hay Gordon definitely should have had better counsel.
Yeah. That's why I said that he just got railroaded.
Yeah.
Real bad. And it was not fair. Like, even if he's guilty.
Yeah.
He deserves the legal protection that a defense can give, to be able to preserve his rights, to make sure that he's not, like his legal rights aren't being trampled on.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But anyway, it was such a shame that, another young lady had been murdered. Obviously, our thoughts are with her and her family.
Yeah.
As always, our thoughts are with the victims.
So please give us a follow and give us a like and a comment. Like I said, give us a comment. Tell us what you think. And give us a 5-star rating. It all really, really helps. It's so appreciated so much. Thank you so much for listening. And you can also find us at Murder Most British on Instagram and TikTok and MMB Podcast on Facebook.
And we always say have a link tree for everywhere that you can follow us down below. So until next week, as per, stay safe and stay curious.
Bye-bye.